On the evening of September 5th, 2008, an emergency call came in. Near a lake in the small Swedish village of Loftahammar, a horribly mutilated female body had been discovered. When police officers and paramedics arrived at the scene, they sadly concluded that there was nothing they could have done to save her. Her body bore horrific wounds and injuries that no human could possibly survive. The victim turned out to be a beloved woman cherished by the entire village. Who could have committed such a monstrous act? The police got to work, not yet realizing that they were about to face the most unbelievable investigation in Swedish history, one filled with questions and unexpected twists. When police officers arrived at Lake Frisksjön in the village of Loftahammar on the evening of September 5th, 2008, after sunset, they found the body of a woman beyond help. She was dead, brutally murdered. Several people stood nearby. One of them identified himself as Ingamar Westland, and the deceased woman as his wife, Agneta Westland. 63-year-old Agneta Westland and her 68-year-old husband Ingamar Westland were both originally from Stockholm, but they had decided to move to the tiny yet picturesque village of Loftahammar on Sweden's southeastern coast, in the heart of the Småland province. It was a popular tourist destination. Only about 400 people lived there year-round, and the village had more vacation homes than permanent residences. Loftahammar attracted visitors with its exceptionally beautiful location, a lush green village surrounded by stunning nature, rocky shorelines, and endless opportunities for outdoor activities. One of the local landmarks, Lake Frisksjön, bordered a dense forest inhabited by all kinds of wildlife, from small squirrels to roe deer, wild boars, majestic moose, and more. It was the perfect place for an idyllic retreat. Everyone who knew Agneta and Ingamar saw them as two inseparable halves of a whole. Ingamar's hair had turned completely white, and wrinkles lined his face. Agneta, too, had begun to show signs of age, but every wrinkle carried memories and emotions from a beautiful, long life. They had been happily married for 42 years and were the proud parents of two wonderful daughters, Clara and Teresa. Both daughters were already grown and raising children of their own. Their two grandchildren made Agneta and Ingamar proud grandparents. Even after their children had grown up and left home, the couple continued to enjoy an active life together. They had built their house in the village from scratch, and over the years it became their little oasis. It was the fulfillment of a dream, a home where the entire family could gather, where their adult children and grandchildren would come to visit. It had been built with immense love. Now that their daughters lived separately, Agneta and Ingamar poured all their affection into their adorable miniature schnauzer puppy. They named him Yaki, and the couple spent nearly every free moment with him. The officers questioned the victim's husband about what had happened, and how Agneta had ended up dead in the forest. Ingamar explained that he had come home around 4:30 p.m. that day. Since the weather was wonderfully pleasant for September, Agneta wanted to take Yaki for a walk. The couple agreed to have dinner a little later than usual. A meat sauce was already waiting in a pot on the stove. All they needed to do was reheat it, cook the spaghetti sitting in a package on the table, and dinner would be ready within minutes. The perfect meal to eat in front of the television. That evening, they were planning to watch the Golden League athletics competition. Not wanting to waste time while Agneta and Yaki were out walking, Ingamar decided to mow the lawn. Agneta said something like, "See you soon," and she and Yaki cheerfully walked past him toward the forest. Ingamar finished mowing the lawn at around 7:30 p.m. He went inside, but neither his wife nor the dog had returned yet. He sat down to wait. He waited and waited. Several hours passed, and Agneta still had not come home. She had been gone far too long for a short walk. Ingamar began to worry. His wife had really wanted to watch Usain Bolt compete. She would never have missed the event. Or at the very least, she would have called to say she was running late. The man watched television, growing visibly anxious. Of course, he tried calling his wife, but she did not answer. The Golden League broadcast ended, and there was still no sign of her. This was completely unlike Agneta. An idea came to Ingamar. He called the neighbors. His wife had many friends in the village, and perhaps someone had seen her. Maybe she had stopped by for a visit and simply lost track of time. But no. Nobody had seen her that evening. Ingamar tried not to think the worst. What could possibly have happened to his wife in such a quiet and peaceful village, one she knew like the back of her hand? Then he remembered how much Agneta loved picking mushrooms, and he convinced himself that perhaps she had come across a patch of beautiful chanterelles along the way, and simply couldn't resist gathering them. But darkness was falling outside, and the man could no longer sit still. Troubling thoughts began creeping into his mind. What if Agneta had bent down to pick a mushroom, tripped, fallen, and was now lying injured somewhere in the forest? Unable to remain idle any longer, Ingamar turned off the television, got into his car, and went searching for her. He drove to every place where his wife liked to walk the dogs or gather mushrooms. She had to be somewhere, but there was no trace of either Agneta or the puppy. Ingamar could not stop searching. He returned home, parked the car, and switched to his ATV. With it, he would be able to reach even the most remote forest paths. Ingamar headed toward the shore of Lake Frisksjön. As he approached, he heard a sound resembling a splash of water, but not an ordinary splash. It was extremely loud, like violent movement in the water. It sounded as though a boat was rapidly moving away from the shore. The noise came so suddenly and echoed so intensely through the silent forest that Ingamar felt a chill run down his spine. He stopped and listened carefully, but the splashing had already stopped. Once again, complete silence fell over the forest. The man started the ATV and drove closer to the shoreline. A long wooden pier stretched out into the lake. Boats were often moored there. As always, the area was surrounded by bushes, trees, and there was not a soul in sight. Then Ingamar froze. He noticed something. Near a boat, lying on the grass, was a horribly mutilated person. Bones protruded from the motionless body. The mouth hung open, the head thrown back unnaturally. Ingamar looked closer, and there was no doubt left in his mind. The clothes, the hair, the body, everything told him it was Agneta. Her injuries looked both horrifying and utterly inexplicable. What had happened to her? Who had done this? Who could possibly be capable of such cruelty? Ingamar felt as though the ground had been ripped out from beneath him. He immediately dialed emergency services. The operator instructed him on how to help the woman and perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Ingamar obediently followed every instruction, even though he already knew his wife was dead. Her injuries were far too severe. He understood that no one could survive something like that. Meanwhile, two neighbors arrived at the lake. They tried to help Ingamar save the woman, but it was too late. The emergency responders who arrived shortly afterward could only confirm what Ingamar already knew. Agneta, his wife of so many years, the mother of his children, the grandmother of his grandchildren, was dead. Outwardly, Ingamar remained calm, though inside he was overwhelmed with emotion. Police examined the area where the body had been found. Agneta lay to the right of a boat standing on the shore. She was lying on her back. A little farther up the slope from the shoreline, officers noticed a tree covered in blood spatter. Beneath it lay several small items that had apparently fallen from Agneta's pocket. Because of this, investigators concluded that she had either been attacked farther from the water or that her body had rolled down the slope. No murder weapon was found. It was even possible that she had not been attacked near the shore at all. At first, even the medical examiner could not determine what had happened. The victim's body was covered in horrific injuries of many different kinds. As the autopsy later revealed, Agneta died from an extremely powerful blow to the torso, a force so severe that it crushed her chest and broke her ribs. In addition to that, her legs bore terrible wounds, as if someone had tried to cut them off. The medical examiner concluded that such injuries could not have been inflicted without some kind of tool, though he could only speculate about what might have caused them. Many theories were proposed, from the possibility that the woman had been run over by a car to the idea that she had been tortured with an angle grinder. Convinced that the woman had fallen victim to a brutal killer, investigators began searching for possible suspects. They did not believe that some bloodthirsty madman had simply been waiting in the forest for a random victim. So the question became, who could have had a motive to kill Agneta? The police did not hesitate for long. Agneta had been loved by everyone in the village. She was charming, kind, and gentle. Investigators decided that the only person who could be behind it was her husband. There was simply no one else. To some extent, their reasoning was understandable. Statistically, spouses are often responsible in murder cases. Furthermore, Ingamar had been the one who found Agneta. He had not called the police earlier, despite the fact that she had been missing for several hours, and he remained remarkably calm and composed, which unsettled the officers. There was another important detail. Neighbors quickly told police that Agneta often walked the dog. They frequently saw them together. But the dog was always on a leash. Yaki had a red collar with reflective stripes so that no one could miss him, along with a long leash they used during walks. The officers found this leash in the kitchen of the house, which struck them as strange. Perhaps Agneta had never gone walking with the dog at all. Developing this theory further, police quickly came up with an idea of how the husband might have carried out the murder. After all, Ingamar himself had said that he was mowing the lawn that evening. Detectives theorized that he could have killed his wife by striking and running over her with the lawnmower. They owned a large riding mower with a seat, which seemed to fit the theory. Supporting this version of events was the fact that blades of grass had been found in Agneta's wounds. However, it was completely impossible to drive the lawnmower down to the lake. The descent was far too steep and overgrown with dense bushes and vegetation. So the police concluded that Ingamar had killed his wife at home, then loaded her body onto the ATV, driven roughly 700 meters to the lake, and dumped her there before calling emergency services with a fabricated story about his wife going for a walk with the dog and never returning. Ingamar was arrested. Early in the morning, a police car arrived at his house. As he was being taken away, his eldest daughter, Teresa, stood on the doorstep waving to her father. At first, he did not even realize that he had become the primary and only suspect in his wife's murder. He was certain the police simply wanted to discuss what had happened and ask him for more details about how he had found the body. He had no idea how far the police suspicions would go, or that this would be far more than just a few questions. Ingamar never expected the 10 days of imprisonment that followed, while investigators worked on their theory of how the woman had been killed. What is even more disturbing is that for quite some time, the authorities did not clearly inform him that they suspected him of killing his wife by running her over with a lawnmower. The thought that Ingamar spent so long in custody without truly understanding why he was being held or exactly what he was accused of is deeply unsettling. Throughout his detention, no one was allowed to visit him, not even his children. The only person permitted to see him was his lawyer. He also briefly spoke with a priest, who informed him that his wife had died from her injuries almost immediately. She had not suffered. This news brought Ingamar some relief. It meant a great deal to him. Around the same time, another piece of news lifted his spirits. Local residents found Yaki, the family's beloved dog, and returned him to Ingamar's daughter. Meanwhile, the police continued testing their theory about how the woman had died. The medical examiner confirmed that, judging by the injuries on Agneta's body, a lawnmower could theoretically have been the murder weapon. As a result, the machine became the subject of intense scrutiny, especially after traces of blood were found on its blades. Investigators conducted an experiment to determine whether Agneta's injuries could really have been caused by those blades. They dressed a pig carcass in jeans and attempted to run it over with the lawnmower, but the experiment failed. The mower simply could not drive over the body, it only pushed it forward. The investigators managed to get the machine on top of it only by reversing, but it seemed highly unlikely that Ingamar had struck his wife in such a manner. The theory felt increasingly far-fetched. Moreover, forensic specialists carefully analyzed the blood found on the blades. The results were not what investigators had hoped for or expected. The blood did not belong to Agneta. In fact, it was not even human blood. Most likely, the mower had run over a mouse or a mole at some point. Unpleasant, certainly, but it had nothing to do with the deceased woman. As a result, police were forced to admit that the murder weapon had to be something else. They desperately tried to imagine what kind of machinery could have been operating in the village at the time and capable of inflicting such horrific injuries. After 10 days in custody, and without finding any new evidence, the police were forced to release Ingamar. They simply turned him out onto the street wearing green prison clothes. At least he was able to attend his wife's funeral. Around 300 people came to say goodbye to the woman. Ingamar sat in the church wondering how many of those present believed he had killed his wife. After all, everyone knew he had been under suspicion. Did they all see him as a murderer? The murderer of the person he loved most in the world? Before long, he learned the answer. Ingamar Westland became an outcast. No one wanted anything to do with him. He was forced to move in with his eldest daughter, Teresa. Fortunately, his children always stood by his side. They never doubted for a moment that their father could have harmed their mother. But both Ingamar and his daughters understood perfectly well that as long as there was no alternative explanation for the death, he would remain the prime suspect. Weeks passed, then months. About half a year after Agnetta's horrific death, Ingamar's phone rang. Was it the police again? Were they summoning him for another interrogation? No, it was a local journalist with astonishing news. He wanted to know how the man felt after police had officially cleared him of all suspicion. A wave of emotion washed over Ingamar. He was shocked and relieved to hear it. An enormous weight lifted from his shoulders. But why was he hearing this from a journalist instead of the police? Was it really so difficult for them to call him? And if he was innocent, then who was the killer? On Agnetta's body, specifically near the corner of one eye, investigators had found several hairs. At first, police assumed they belonged to her dog. But much later, someone decided it would not hurt to send them to a laboratory for analysis. When the results came back, investigators no longer had any doubts. The hairs had not come from a dog. They had come from the killer. They even knew roughly what the killer looked like. A long face, large eyes, a rather large body, antlers on its head, dark hair, or rather, dark fur, because the culprit in this case turned out to be a moose. The hairs found on Agnetta's body belonged to an animal from the deer family. The laboratory could not determine the exact species, but when detectives consulted wildlife experts specializing in large cervids and asked whether such an attack could have been carried out by an animal like a deer, the experts immediately asked one question: had saliva been found on the body? As it turned out, the woman's entire jacket was covered in saliva, and excessive salivation during an attack is characteristic of moose. At that point, there was little doubt left. Agneta had died as the result of a moose attack. Moose are extremely common in Sweden. They are the largest species in the deer family, and adult males can weigh anywhere from 260 to 700 kilograms. But as a rule, these animals are harmless and tend to avoid humans. Most incidents occur when drivers collide with them on highways. Imagine crashing into a 700-kilogram moose at full speed. Normally, moose are slow and calm creatures, though they can move very quickly when frightened or aggressive. Even then, attacks rarely end in death. Unfortunately, Agneta became the victim of a series of terrible coincidences that led to her premature death. First, according to experts, the moose that attacked her may have been drunk. It had likely eaten fermented apples, which affect moose much the way alcohol affects humans. Second, because Agneta had taken the dog for a walk without a leash, the freely running puppy may have triggered the moose's aggression. Yaki probably ran ahead and started barking. The intoxicated moose became frightened, enraged, and charged after the dog. Agneta rushed to protect Yoke. She may have picked the dog up or shielded him with her own body. For a massive moose, it would have taken only a single leap to knock the woman to the ground. And once Agneta fell, the situation would have become extremely dangerous within seconds. The third factor that contributed to her death was timing. The horrific incident happened shortly before mating season, a period during which moose become especially sensitive, and their behavior toward both animals and humans can become far more aggressive and unpredictable. As I mentioned earlier, attacks by these animals on humans are extraordinarily rare. The police had never encountered anything like this before, and initially found it impossible to believe that an animal could have inflicted such devastating injuries on Agneta. That changed when they saw a particular video recording. In the footage, two moose stand near a building. Suddenly, one of them charges at a passerby, violently striking and trampling the person. 9 months after Agneta's body had been discovered in the forest, the police finally identified the killer. It was a drunk moose. Of course, these were good news, but the relief brought by the case being solved was overshadowed by the outrageous way the police had treated Ingamar. He expected detectives to appear at his doorstep, apologize to him, and explain how his wife had died. But no, they merely sent him a letter, never apologizing even once. What is more, after successfully solving the case, the police held a press conference and did not even invite the victim's husband, the man who had spent nearly 9 months under suspicion for her death. Unsurprisingly, he filed a lawsuit. He sought compensation of 600,000 Swedish kroner for the way he had been treated and imprisoned. He did receive compensation, but the amount was far smaller, only 24,000 Swedish kroner. Still, money had never really mattered to him. What Ingamar wanted was an apology, and that was the one thing he never received. Even though the police had cleared him, many residents of the small village were far less willing to do the same. Some people still believed he was the killer. After all, as the saying goes, there's no smoke without fire. When he bought a new lawnmower, people whispered about whether he was purchasing it to kill even more people. This man lost not only his wife, but also his home. The peaceful paradise they had loved no longer felt safe for him. Ingamar was forced to sell the house that he and his wife had built together with such love and care. He moved away to live closer to his daughters. Now he tries to focus on simple, everyday joys, picking up his grandchildren from school and taking. It is impossible not to sympathize with Ingamar. His beloved wife of 42 years died in a horrific way. The police rushed to accuse him of murdering her, denied him the chance to grieve in peace, and never apologized when they discovered that it had not been a murder at all, but a tragic accident in the forest. The police certainly should have shown more respect and compassion, and should not have rushed to conclusions. At the same time, it feels as though Ingamar was incredibly fortunate that investigators did not stop at a single theory, as so often happens, and eventually decided to test those hairs found on the victim's body. Otherwise, the ending of this case could have been very different. Agneta would have gone down in history as the victim of her husband's brutality, and Ingamar as a deranged killer who murdered his wife with a lawnmower. Instead of spending the rest of his life surrounded by his daughters and grandchildren, he might have spent it behind prison bars.